Did you know that back in 1989, the top 1% of US households controlled less than 23% of the entire wealth in this country, while the bottom 90% of US households controlled 40% of the entire wealth in 1989 and dropped to 31% in 2023. The numbers don't lie. The rich got richer over the past 35 years. But this video is not about how to tax the rich, or some may say, eat the rich. Instead, I want to dive deep into their investments and how they went from being in the bottom 50% to the top 1%, because I used to think that it was impossible for someone like me to ever reach 7 figures in net worth when I had almost $110,000 in credit card debt, personal loans, car loans, and a 401k loan. But it happened because I learned from the people who were once in my kind of situation. And I thought it was all about picking the right stocks, but it came down to my behavior with spending, savings, and investing. My savings rate mattered way more than how much I made in return every single year. Knowledge is probably 30% of my financial success, while the other 70% is entirely on my behavior. Not everyone can become a top 1% income earner, but if you can change your behavior, you can absolutely have your net worth in the millions, which puts you at least in the top 5%. And before I get into the types of assets wealthy people invest, here are the first 10 states with the highest threshold to become the top 1% income earner. Let me know in the comment section down below what state you're watching this from. Connecticut was a surprising one at the highest at $952,000 a year to be considered the top 1%, followed by Massachusetts at $903,000, and California came in third at $844,000 a year. And New York was another surprising one at $776,000 a year in fifth place. But then they also accounted for upstate New York as well. The next 20 states, with Wyoming followed by Virginia, and ended with Alaska in the 30th place. Nevada is the state that I resided, and I'm surprised to find out that it's ranked 17th with $603,000 a year for the 1% threshold. As far as my income goes, I'm not close at all to that amount, and maybe one day. And the next 20 states, with Nebraska with $535,000, while West Virginia is ranked the lowest with $367,000 a year to meet the top 1% threshold. So how relevant is your income when it comes to investing? Obviously, it very much matters if you're looking to achieve multi-millions with a higher savings rate. In 2023, I'm able to save anywhere between 65 and 70% of my gross income because I'm debt-free and I prioritize my savings and investments. Did I start with a 65% savings rate right away? Of course not. I remember starting with 5% in 2015, and then I gradually increased from 5% to 25%. As my income increased, my savings rate increased at the same time from 25% to 50%. This was when I realized how powerful the compound interest was going to work in my favor when I started putting away half of my income towards long-term investments. But I couldn't save half of my income when I still had a car loan, credit card debt, or a personal loan. But in 2022, CNBC reported that 36% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck while making over $250,000 a year. Yep, you heard that correctly. 36% of the top 5% of income earners in the United States lived paycheck to paycheck due to inflation, rising credit card debt, buying luxury vehicles, and getting into a mortgage that cost them more than 30% of their income. You'd be surprised to hear that many people making $250,000 a year or more do not budget their income and expenses. They end up taking out more car loans, HELOC, and credit card debt to fund their lifestyle. This is a choice. As a financial coach for many years, there are actually more people making $70,000 a year who are much more disciplined with their finances than people making $300,000 a year. And as I said at the beginning of this video, most of the time it's a behavioral issue because you're spending way more than you make. If you're making $200,000 a year with $100,000 in debt, if you're not making a plan to pay off your debt in 2 years, then you're never going to be able to build your wealth. It's a common math problem. However, if you're making $20,000 a year, living in an area where you need at least $40,000 a year to survive, then it becomes an income problem, right? Just check out Caleb Hammer's channel, who constantly has to grill people for their misbehavior. So what this tells me is that how much you make in income is irrelevant if you choose to take out more debt or if you choose to spend more money because you feel the need to keep up with the Joneses. So regardless of your income, if you spend more than you make, you're going to be broke one day. And a lot of lottery winners actually ended up filing for bankruptcy. So it's really just common sense and your behavior. And could you become wealthy making less than $100,000 a year? Absolutely. What really comes down to is your savings rate. If you save 25% of your $70,000 in gross income is $17,500 a year. So if you increase your savings rate by just 2% every year, starting with $17,500, in 30 years, you're going to have almost $2.6 million with an 8% average annual return. You can download this compound interest calculator for absolutely free by visiting firesightchat.com/resources. This is a simple math problem you need to be able to solve before you even start investing. People in the top 1% already have this figured out because they understand the power of compound interest. So, what are some assets that the top 1% buy to diversify their net worth? Let's take a look. First, they diversify their intangible assets because they understand the importance of savings, the basics of investing, and how to balance their portfolio based on the macroeconomic environment. For cash allocation, they will always have cash that will cover their emergency expenses. They will always have cash to cover their discretionary expenses so they can have fun. They always have cash to invest in future real estate deals, businesses, and other tangible assets. They always have a line of credit to their brokerage accounts or real estate, but only because they have the cash to repay them in full if the interest rates ever go up, like right now. And they always have stocks and bonds. They don't just concentrate on the US and EU stocks, but they also focus on other up and rising markets like Singapore, Korea, and other countries with booming economies. This is almost equivalent to international mutual funds if you're brand new to investing. They also understand the practice of balancing their portfolios. Having too much in one asset class more than the others will only create more risks. They may not always have time, so they may outsource this to an investment firm or a hedge fund that can manage the asset allocation for them. You may not have the resources to do that just yet, so you have to learn to manage your own investments. But they don't just focus on intangible assets. They use the cash they have to start a business or invest in a business. The top 1% don't take out any debt for their personal expenses. Instead, they use debt to grow their businesses. Now, I am not entirely against debt as long as you use it for appreciating assets, but it is dumb if you use something like your credit card and leave a balance on it. Some people don't even need to take out debt to start a business if they have the cash to do it. When I started my financial coaching business, I decided to entirely cash flow it instead of taking out a business loan. I just reinvest what I make from the business right back into my business to grow over time. I didn't build my $10,000 YouTube studio in just one day, but I built it with the business revenue over time. If you want to check out every piece of equipment I have in my YouTube studio, feel free to check out my website at firesightchat.com/shopping. And I grew my channel from 700 to 10,000 subscribers in a year. And I wouldn't be surprised if this channel just continues to grow over time. So I really appreciate all of the subscribers right now. And as the business continues to grow, I'm going to have more 1099 contractors and possibly W-2 employees to help with my business. So debt should only be used for something that will appreciate over time and not on something that has no value or depreciating values. Getting a car loan is borrowing money for something that depreciates over time. Getting a mortgage, on the other hand, is borrowing money for something that appreciates over time. Do you get the difference? And some people are not cut out to be business owners, and that's okay. So they choose to invest in a business instead. Investing in a business requires cash and a trusted network. If some random guy reaches out to me and says that he wants to invest in my business, I'm probably gonna say no because I don't know anything about the guy, right? This is why it's important to create a network of like-minded people that will lead to better opportunities like investing in commercial or private real estate. Maybe you want to open a restaurant franchise or be in the storage business. Maybe you want to be a part of the group that invests in apartment complexes. And speaking of real estate, the top 1% also do not own primary homes right away because the home you live in is actually considered an expense and not an investment. The truth is that you're not going to see any ROI from your primary residence until you sell it. It's not an investment because you're paying for the mortgage and not someone else living in it as a tenant. So your primary residence is not an investment, it is an expense. So instead, they invest in multi-unit or commercial real estate. If I'm someone who's just starting out, I would highly consider buying a duplex or triplex so that I can live in one of the units while renting out the other units. I personally know people who live in one unit for a year and then move out to a new unit to cash flow their real estate investments. But before you do anything with real estate, you need to have cash to buy those properties. This is why you'll need to prioritize cash and stocks before you even get to real estate. Don't take a shortcut by just taking out a HELOC or a home equity loan because you're going to end up over leveraging your assets if you don't have a proper plan to repay it in full. And no one ever starts big right away. They start small and then gradually build their wealth over time. Eventually, they find the opportunity to invest in houses, apartments, and commercial real estate. And one thing to keep in mind is that you should never over leverage your assets. I personally keep my debt to equity ratio, the DE ratio, at 50% or less. Anything more than 60%, in my opinion, is considered a medium risk on my personal risk scale. Some people may argue that 70% is okay, but I would say that's in the high risk area. The DE ratio, or the debt to equity ratio, applies to almost anything from running a business and owning real estate to invest in a business. Let me give you some examples. If a company's total liabilities are $5 million and its shareholders' equity is $2 million, the debt to equity ratio is $5 million divided by $2 million, and the DE ratio is 2.5, right? To me, that DE ratio is high because every one equity unit has 2.5 debt units. And let's use my real estate property as an example. I have $250,000 in equity with $150,000 in debt. $150,000 divided by $250,000 is a 0.6 DE ratio. That's much healthier because the equity is much higher than the liability. If I had to sell the property, I could pay the debt off right away. That makes sense so far, right? The same concept applies to stock market investing. Before I invest in any company, I make sure to look at the company's balance sheet to consider the DE ratio. How to measure the DE ratio for a company is by simply adding long-term debt with the current portion of long-term debt and then dividing them by total shareholders' equity. And I know that my examples are really generic and somewhat high level, but that's my thought process with the DE ratio. The DE ratio matters to the wealthy people because they need to know how much they can leverage their assets. It also matters to me because my assets will continue to grow into multi-millions over the years. This is not a humble brag or anything, it's simple math. Over leveraging anything is practically giving your assets a death sentence. And I know I'm really nerding out here, but I hope it gives you a different perspective on debt and equity. Debt should only be used to grow your wealth, not to use it for something that you want. So let's nerd out just a little bit more here into the data. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the top 1% of American households own 31% of the nation's wealth, while the bottom 50% of households hold only 2.4%. And what I found out is that the bottom 50% of households have the majority of their assets in real estate. So between 50 and 90%, they only own 7.8% of their assets in stocks and 37.5% in real estate. The bottom 50% only own 2.2% in stocks and 52.1% in real estate. But if you look at the top 1%, right, 42.8% of their assets are in stocks, while only 13.2% of their assets are in real estate. What this tells me is that the bottom 90% has most of their wealth concentrated in a single asset, which is their primary home. The top 1% has diversified assets between real estate, stocks, and bonds. And I think we're so obsessed with owning a home before we're financially ready. And I was one of them. I bought a house in 2014 when I shouldn't have, and I was still in debt, and I barely had any money in my emergency fund or in my investments. You always hear from people that renting is wasting money and that home ownership is a way to build your wealth. While that's true, but buying a house before you have a fully funded emergency fund and being consumer debt free is the opposite of building your wealth. You have to do it step by step. Let's take a look at the total liabilities between these two households. The top 1% has on average 4.6% in total liabilities. Do rich people leverage their debt to build their wealth? Sure, but they do it responsibly, right? And they don't bite more than they can chew. Just because you have $100,000 in home equity, it doesn't mean that you should take out a HELOC to try to invest in something else. If you look at the bottom 50%, they have just 6% of assets, but a whopping 32% of liabilities. Between 50 and 90%, they have 30% of assets and 43% of liabilities. And that's not a healthy ratio at all, right? This is extremely unhealthy for the people in the bottom 50%. And I was one of the bottom 50% in 2014 when I had almost $110,000 in consumer debt with only $500 saved in my savings account. And I'm not in the top 1% right now, but I am definitely in the 90 to 99%. Did I go straight from the bottom 50% to 90% right away? Absolutely not. And I created this FIRE checklist many years ago, and it's worked out really well for me since 2016. And it took me 2 years to sell almost everything I had and pay off my debt from 2014 to 2016. And I didn't truly start investing until I was 31 years old in 2016 when I had my emergency fund fully funded. In 2017, I maxed out my Roth IRA and 401k. In 2018, I started investing more in my index funds for early retirement. By 2019, I saved over 60% of my income. My savings rate absolutely mattered more than the interest that accrued inside my taxable brokerage account. Let me ask you this simple math problem. Do you think that you'll make more money with a $10,000 investment or $1,000? If you need help with your personal math problem, you can download my free spreadsheets and other financial resources for absolutely free by visiting firesightcheck.com/resources. And you may be someone watching this video sitting at the bottom 50%, or you could also be someone sitting at 50 to 90 or 90 to 99. Your goal is to not go directly from the bottom 50 to the top 1% in a matter of days, but you need to have a realistic, measurable, and achievable long-term plan to achieve or build your wealth over time. And the truth is that many people in the bottom 50% have more debt than assets. The bottom 50% also has too much of their assets tied up in their primary homes. So it's difficult for them to gain access to cash. So this is your time to start paying off your stupid debt, save up for an emergency fund, and start investing. And I didn't get to where I am today without taking those steps. And if you want to know more about how I built 7 figures in assets and diversify my income streams, be sure to check out these 2 videos. So with that said, I appreciate you watching my video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Have a good one.